Installing Ubuntu. Intro. Here we have VirtualBox. Before I get into anything, I'll quickly show you where to download this from. So I'm going to open up my browser and go to the VirtualBox website, which is just here. And as you can see, we've got an option for Windows, OS X or Mac, Linux distributions and Solaris. Chances are you're going to want one of these three. Go ahead and click one of them and it will download it for your system. I would also recommend grabbing the VirtualBox extension pack here. So you can just click on that and it supports all platforms. It just allows for support for USB devices and more. Next, you're going to need Ubuntu because that's what we're installing. So if you go to the Ubuntu page, you can then click on Server here, go to Option 2, and then download Ubuntu Server like so. I do have a copy of this already, but I'm going to download this because mine's a little bit old. So this will just prevent me having to do too much updating once the system's installed. If you're going to be doing this on a physical system, you may want to put this ISO onto a USB stick and boot from that to be able to install Ubuntu. For that, I'd recommend using this. If using Windows anyway. If using Linux, there are other options available, but I won't be getting into that now. Same for Mac OS. Have a little Google around, you'll find something. But chances are you might be doing this on Windows. So this tool here, called Universal USB Installer, allows you to put an ISO on a USB and boot from that. So if you scroll down, you'll see the option to download UUI just here. Click on that, and then you'll be able to go through the steps as shown in these screenshots. Now we have all our tools, we can go ahead and get going. So first things first, I'm going to decide where my VMs will be stored. So I'm going to go to Preferences under File and change this to where I want my VMs to be. And I've actually already done this, but if you want to, you can just drop down that menu, click Other, and you'll be able to select a new folder. Once you've done that, we can go ahead and start creating a VM. So to create a VM, all we need to do is go ahead and click New. Now we could go through these settings page by page, like so. I'm just going to put a random name in there and click Next. And you'll see we've got this option here for memory now. I'm not going to do that because all this is a separate paging of what's actually in expert mode. Expert mode isn't for experts. It just puts it all on one screen. As you can see, there's that memory again. Same page as what we just had there in guided mode. Nothing different. And then we've got the option to create a hard disk, which would be the third page if we were in guided mode. So actually, expert mode isn't really for experts. I just recommend doing this because you can set everything up in one go. So I'm going to call this Ubuntu Server. I'm going to leave the VM's location as it is, or the machine folder where it is. As I've already set that in Preferences, it should show up here. The type will be Linux, and the version will be Ubuntu 64-bit. Now there's a lot of options here, as you can see. We're going to be installing Ubuntu, and we're going to stick with that. You might only have 32-bit if you don't have virtualization enabled within your BIOS. If you don't see 64-bit, you need to go to your BIOS and enable virtualization. You can have a look at the manufacturer's manual for your BIOS for how to do that. Chances are you will have the option to enable it though, because pretty much every modern CPU supports virtualization these days. So make sure you've got 64-bit enabled. If you haven't, you're going to have to download a 32-bit version of Ubuntu and then come back and set this to be 32-bit. Next, I'm going to set my memory size or RAM size, and this is going to be 4 GB or 4096. The reason it's 4096 and not 4000 is because it goes up in 1024 megabytes per gigabyte. So that's why it's 4096. The next section is to set up a hard disk. We don't want this top option. We don't have an existing one, so we're going to create a new virtual one now. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Create. This will prompt us with a new screen here for a virtual hard disk. I'm going to be setting this system up with RAID, which stands for Redundant Array of Independent Disks. The reason I'm doing this is because for anyone following along with a physical machine, this allows for redundancy, meaning if a disk dies, you can still use the system. It means you won't lose any data, basically. For a virtual machine, it's not really required. So if you don't want to do RAID on your system, if you're doing this on a virtual machine, that's absolutely fine. Just set up one disk and follow along with the tutorial. I will also show you how to set up one disk in Ubuntu before moving along to set up RAID. So I'm going to call this -d1 on the end, or append -d1 on the end. I'm going to set the size to be 50 gigabytes. Just for now. Usually you'd have a much larger size disk, but I'm just going to set it to 50 gigabytes for the sake of this tutorial. I could leave this as VDI, but I'm actually going to change it to VHD. I find VHDs generally easier to convert if you decide to go to libvirt later down the line. And finally, I'm going to leave it as dynamically allocated because that means that the size of the disk on my physical system will grow with the size of the virtual operating system. So for example, when it starts, it will just be a couple of 100 kilobytes. Then as it grows, as the operating system's installed, it will grow to between 2 and 4 gigabytes. But it will allow it to be read up to 50 gigabytes within the virtual machine. So I've got everything as I want. I'm now going to click create. And there's our virtual machine. All we need to do now is just go through a few settings and just make sure everything's in order. So first things first, this is all as I want it to be. I'm not going to enable the shared clipboard and drag and drop. However, if you're using a desktop version, then you might want this enabled. This just allows you to drag from your physical machine over to the virtual machine, as well as copy and paste from your physical machine to the virtual machine and back, if you set bidirectional anyway. Otherwise, as you can see, you've got some other options here. I'll leave everything else as it is. Next, I'll go down to System and have a look at these settings here. These all look in order to me. I'm just going to go over to the processor and set the CPUs to be 2. I could set this higher or all the way up to 4 if I wanted to, really, without affecting my system. But I don't really need 4 CPUs in this virtual machine, so that's fine. I'm not going to worry about acceleration either. Next, we'll go to Display and take a look at this. Again, if you're using a desktop version, you might want to set this to the maximum available, and you might want to set your monitor count to a different number depending on how many screens you have and how many you want it to span. Again, I'm not going to need this, and I'm also not going to need 3D acceleration purely because of the fact I've not got a desktop. I won't want any remote display or recording, so I can leave them too. Next, we'll go over to storage and take a look at this. So the first thing I need is to set up a ISO, which is the one I just downloaded a moment ago. So if I have a look here, it should be empty. I can drop down here. These are some of the ones I've already used in the past, but I'm going to go to choose a disk file and take a look here. Now, as you can see, the one I've just downloaded and the one I originally downloaded are actually the same version here. So I can use either or of these. I'm going to select the latest just for the sake of making sure I've got the latest ISO, but by the looks of it, nothing's changed there because the versioning hasn't changed. Next, I'm going to go over to SATA and add a new hard disk, which is this little icon just here with the disk and a plus. So I'll click on that. And we're going to use the same process that we used to create the first disk. So I'm going to click create, put -D2 on the end for this disk, set it to 50 gigabytes because I want it to be the same size as the original disk, set it to VHD, and dynamically allocated. The reason I'm setting it to the same size is because of the RAID I mentioned earlier. That needs to be exactly the same disk size. So I'll click create. And there we can see one is attached and one is not. So I'll just click choose on the unattached one. And we have 2 disks now. So that's ready to go. We'll be booting from this ISO, and then we have these 2 disks to install to. And as you can see here, look, the actual size is only 102 kilobytes, but the virtual size is 50 gigabytes. I don't need to worry about audio because I'm not going to have any audio on a server. So I'll jump over to network next. I'm not going to be getting into the networking details right now, but I'm going to be sitting on a bridged adapter here because NAT, which stands for Network Address Translation, will essentially create a small private network within the virtual machine environments. I don't want this. I want to be able to have this virtual machine seen as a physical machine to my actual network at home. So my router at home will see this as its own independent computer. It won't realize that it's a virtual machine. So bridged adapter, select my adapter that I want. I'm on wireless on this machine, so I'm going to select my wireless adapter. And then there's a few other options you can set here, but again, I'm not going to be getting into networking right now, so we don't need to worry about that. Just make sure you've got enable network adapter ticked and we can get going. Serial ports I don't need to worry about. USB, shared folders and user interface I'm also not too worried about. If you want to pass through some USB devices, then you can do that here. And you can also map shared folders, as in a machine from your physical machine over to your virtual machine from this location. I've got everything done that I want though, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now we're ready to start installing the operating system. To install the operating system, all we need to do is click Start on the VM, and that will start the virtual machine up. Now, this will probably load up on my other display, so I'm going to drag it across as soon as it becomes available. And there it is, so I'll drag that across. There we go. I'm going to hit Escape here, which you can also do if you want. It just allows you to set up your installer language. So as you can see, there's a few options here. I want mine to be English. And then there's a few options available here. This isn't about all these options, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit Install Ubuntu Server. But if you do need the hardware enablement kernel, then that's the second option just here. If you do need that, you'll know why you need that and know about that. Chances are you don't need that though, so we'll just go ahead and install the Ubuntu server. Hit enter on that option. Now we'll just wait for it to boot. If you see any errors at this point, then it's worth re-downloading the ISO. There's a chance something went wrong when downloading. And here we are with the installer ready to go. The first thing I'm going to do is select my language. This will be the language for the operating system, not the installer. We selected that on the previous screen. So I'm going to go down to English UK. I'm not going to update my installer. You've just seen that I've just downloaded this ISO and there's still an update available here. So It's up to you if you want to do this. I won't be doing this, so I'm just going to click continue without updating. Next is the keyboard setup. I'm going to again set mine to be English UK and leave the variant as it is. You can identify your keyboard if you want to. It'll just get you to press a few keys and it will guess what kind of keyboard you're using or what language of keyboard or the layout of your keyboard. If you know what you're using, just set it in the layout and variant and then click done. Now we'll set up our network. Now you can just leave this as it is. If you want, you'll get DHCP IPs from your router. Well, at least I would imagine you will, unless you've turned off DHCP on your router. If you have turned off DHCP, then you'll know why you've done that and you'll likely want to set static IP. If you haven't done that and you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. DHCP just stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, and it's a network feature that allows your machine to automatically get an IP from your router. If you're not worried about that and you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Just click done. Just make sure you've got an IP address and then click done. I, however, am going to be setting a static IP because I want to make sure that this machine gets the same IP every single time. Don't copy what I've got here because the chances are your network might be very slightly different. The 192.168.0 may be very different to what I have here. I'll wait for that to come up. You can see it says not connected right now, and there we go. It's connected because the notes are now blank. So I'm going to go ahead and carry on. Before I do carry on, I'll just quickly cover what creating a bond is. So in a nutshell, creating a bond is basically like merging a load of network interfaces together. So say you have 4 in your machine and they all run at a speed of 100 megabits per second. Then you can combine those interfaces together to make them run at 400 megabits per second. You have to do a little bit of trickery on the router side, but that's essentially it. You're just bonding those network interfaces together and they all work as one. Now that I've covered creating a bond, you can see we don't need one, so I'm just going to click done. I'm going to be skipping this and leaving the proxy address as blank because I don't have a proxy server. If you do have a proxy server, then chances are you'll know what that is. If you don't know what this is, or you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Just skip over this and leave this blank because the chances are you don't have a proxy server. Same for this. If you do have a mirror that you have to use, you'll have been told about this. However, I would just recommend leaving it as it is because unless your network administrator, if you have one and you're not doing this from home, has blocked access to the main Ubuntu archives, then you won't need to worry about it. So just leave it as it is and hit done. Right, now we're going to move on to disks. So I said at the start that we're going to be setting this up with RAID. That's why I added the 2 disks. I'm also going to be using something called the Logical Volume Manager, also known as LVM. This allows us to expand disks at a later date if we want to. I might cover that later on. We'll see what the videos pan out like. So, how's it going to work? We're going to first go through setting up RAID on the disks, and then we'll go through and set up LVM on top of that. There is another way of doing it. If you use a single disk and you don't want LVM, which is boot, root, and swap, you'll see those partitions in the RAID and LVM setup, but you wouldn't set up RAID and LVM. I'll quickly cover how to do that, then delete everything, and then we'll go and set it up properly. So we could leave this as LVM and just hit next, but we don't want to do that. That's the easier way. We're trying to learn here, aren't we? So we're going to go to custom storage layout and set up our own disks. So I'll hit spacebar on that to select it and then hit done. And here is a summary of our disks. So first I'm going to go through how to set up a basic single disk setup. Then I'll delete everything and go back to setting it up using RAID, which is what I presume most people will want if using physical hardware. If you're using a virtual machine like me and you're using a single disk, then you can follow this process now. If you have a UEFI based system, then you're going to need to add a ESP partition or a BIOS grub partition, it's called in the Ubuntu land. So to do that, you simply hit enter and then click user's boot device, like so. Now you can get going setting up the rest of the partitions. If you don't have UEFI and you're using a legacy based system, or you're just doing this in a virtual machine, you will not need this. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit reset because I'm in a virtual machine. Remember, that's only required if you're using a UEFI-based system that is a physical system, not a virtual machine like this is. So let's get into it after that slightly confusing preamble just there. The first thing you need to do is set up the first partition, which is going to be for boot. So I'm going to hit enter, add a GPT partition. I'm going to set this size to be 1 gig. Now, 512 megabytes would be fine, but to be honest, depending on who you speak to, it can vary. I just set it to 1 gigabyte. It gives it more than enough space for the boot partition, and we can just move on. I'll leave the format to be ext4 and set the mount point to be /boot. Then hit create. That's the boot partition done. Next, I'll go back to that same disk, hit enter again, add GPT partition, and then we're going to set up the swap space next. Okay, let's go over the rules of swap space really quick, which can be confusing if you don't know what it is. Swap space is literally just used for overflow of memory. If you run out of memory, then swap space is used to store that information. So what are the rules of swap? These are recommended on the Red Hat website. They're not hard rules, but they are recommended. So I recommend you follow them too. I keep saying recommend. Stop saying recommend. So if you have 2 GB of RAM, set your swap size to be 4 GB in size. 6 GB if you want your system to support hibernation. If you have between 2 GB of RAM and 8 GB of RAM, then you need to set your swap size to be the same as the RAM, and it needs to be twice the amount if you want to support hibernation. So say you have 6 GB of RAM, then you want to set it to be 6 GB of swap size, but if you're using hibernation, it needs to be 12 GB. If you have greater than 8 GB of RAM, then it's recommended you to set your swap size to be 4 GB in size. However, if you want hibernation, it should be 1.5 times the amount of your RAM. If it's greater than 64 GB of RAM you have, then don't set it up for hibernation because it's not recommended at this size. However, the rule of 4 GB swap space is still recommended. Okay, so based on those rules, I know that I have 4 GB of RAM, so I'm going to set my swap size to be 4 GB because I'm not worried about hibernation here. So it just needs to match my RAM. I'm going to set the format to be swap, and the mount point will not exist because this is swap space. So I'll go ahead and click create. So now I'm going to go ahead and set up the root partition. This is the partition where the operating system data will be stored. So one final time, I'll go to the disk, hit enter, add GPT partition. I'm going to leave the size as blank this time to make sure it fills the space. I'm going to leave the format as ext4 and the mount point as just /. I'll go ahead and click create now. And that's our disk configured. We have the root partition, the boot partition, and the swap partition. Everything's good to go now, so we could go ahead and click done, click continue, and that would install the operating system to that disk. However, we wanted RAID, so I'm not going to continue. I'm going to hit reset and now go through RAID. Remember, if you're on a virtual machine or you have a single disk, this will work. It'll be absolutely fine. But we're not going to be doing that because we have multiple disks, and chances are on a physical system, like a server, you'd be using multiple disks. So I'm going to go ahead and hit reset. Now we're going to go ahead and set up RAID. RAID, when you first look at it, might seem a little bit more complex than the original setup. However, once we're finished, you'll see we have the same boot, root, and swap partitions available, or at least mount points. The partitioning will be very different. So whatever we do on the first disk, we'll need to repeat on the second disk. And just one final note, you can't go straight down to create software RAID, hit these disks here, and click create, because as you can see, if you put all of the disks into RAIDs or LVM VGs, which is Logical Volume Manager volume groups, there will be nowhere to put the boot partition. So we need to go and create the partitions first that RAID will then use. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to the first disk, and then I'm going to set user's boot device. Now, if this disk were to die, I'd want to know the system can still boot. So I'm going to go to the second disk and add as another boot device. You'll see we have these 2 BIOS scrub spaces down here now. So we have that. Now let's go ahead and set up the disks for RAID. So I'll hit enter, add a GPT partition, set the first partition to 1 GB in size, as this will eventually be used for the / boot mount point. We'll set the format to be leave unformatted, and then we'll hit create. We'll then go to that disk again, add another partition, set a 4 GB unformatted partition up, and hit create. This one will be used for swap. And then finally, one more partition, which we won't set a size for because we want it to fill the space. We'll set the format to be leave unformatted, and again, hit create, no mount points. We'll now replicate this on the second disk. So let's get down to here and do that. And there we have it. Both disks are configured in exactly the same way. They both have a BIOS scrub spacer, meaning should one of the disks die, the other disk can still be used to boot. And then the partitioning is set up exactly the same. We have partition 2 on each disk, which is 1 GB. We have partition 3 on each disk, which is 4 GB. And then we have partition 4 on each disk, which is 44.997 GB. So let's say 45. Next, we're going to go ahead and configure that software RAID. So we'll go down to create software RAID, hit enter, and we'll see all those partitions available. So the first thing I'm going to do is leave the name as MD0. Next, I'm going to leave the RAID level as mirrored, also known as RAID 1. There is something called RAID 0, which is striped, meaning it writes the first byte to the first disk, the second byte to the second disk, the third byte to the first disk, the fourth byte to the second disk, and so on. The problem with this setup is that if one of the disks die, you'll lose half of the data, or half of the data of a file, essentially. It's dangerous on its own, so usually you'll see people do RAID 10 or RAID 10, which is mirrored and then striped. Mirrored means that everything will be written to the first disk and then mirrored over to the second disk. And that's why you can lose a disk and not lose any data. 5 and 6 are a little bit more complex, and I won't be getting into them right now as that's a more advanced topic. So we're going to stick with RAID 1 or mirrored and select our partitions. So the first partitions we're going to select is partition 2 or the 1 GB partition. So we'll do that now. And then we'll go down to create. And there you can see MD0. That's now configured and it has a size of 1022 meg. There's going to be a tiny little bit of data taken up in that partition just for the RAID side of things because it's software RAID. So you won't see the full size 1 GB that we saw, which would be 1024 megabytes. So next we'll go down and do the same thing again for partition 3. So we'll go to create software RAID, select partition 3 or the 4 GB partition, again leaving the name and the RAID level as they are, and then hit create. And there we have it, MD1. So we'll do it one more time for the final partition, and partition 4, the 44 GB one or 45 GB one. And again, we'll just go ahead and hit create, and we have 3 MD devices now. So now we can start creating our file systems and the mount points. So we'll go to MD0 first, which is going to be for our boot mount point, hit enter, add a GPT partition. We'll leave the sizes empty this time because we want it to fill the full gigabyte of space. Next, we'll leave the format as ext4, as we did originally, and we'll set the mount point to /boot. Next, we'll hit create, and there's our boot partition. Now we'll go down to that swap size, which is the 4 GB one, or just under 4 GB. Hit add GPT partition, set the format to be swap, and as before, there is no mount point for swap, so we'll hit create. And then finally, we'll go down to the MD2. Now, we could, again, go to here, set the mount point to /, leave the format as ext4, and hit create. We're not going to be doing that though. We're going to just do one more little thing on top of this, which is to set up LVM, which stands for Logical Volume Manager. The reason we're doing this is it means that later on down the line, we can add more disks to our system. We can expand the logical volume out onto those disks, giving us more space for our root partition or root file system. Now, that might not make a lot of sense at the moment, but as we move into later videos, you'll start to see how this will work. So I recommend doing this because if you're going to follow along with all these videos, we're going to be touching on this later. So I'm going to go ahead and create a volume group. I'm going to leave it as VG0 as a name. Select the 44 GB MD2 device. I'm not going to encrypt my volume because this is a virtual machine, and I don't want to have to enter a password every time I turn my machine on. However, if you need encryption, I recommend doing this here. You can hit spacebar on that to select it, then set a passphrase on these two here, and then click create. Again, I don't need it though, so I'm just going to untick that and hit create. You'll see we have this new available device as VG0 now. So this is our Logical Volume Manager volume group. We're now going to create a logical volume within this volume group. You can have multiple volume groups and multiple logical volumes within them. So I'm going to hit enter on this and create a logical volume. This I'm going to set as LV-root to denote that this is our root mount point or root file system. I'm going to leave the size as empty to fill the space. I'll leave the format as ext4 and leave the mount point as / for the root file system. Now I'll click create. And we're finally done. That's all our disk setup. As you can see, we've got that root, boot, and swap partition again, but they just look a little bit different than they did before. So the process is very different, but the end result is essentially the same, but now we have redundancy and a system that can be expanded on later without having to introduce downtime and things like that. So yeah, this is looking good. Let's go ahead and hit done. It will give us that same warning again, saying, are you sure you want to continue formatting these disks? You'll lose all your data on this disk. Well, these are brand new disks. We've just created them as part of the VM creation. So we'll just go ahead and hit continue. Now we have to enter our name, server name, a username, and some passwords. So I'm just going to put that in now. Here, I would usually recommend installing the OpenSSH server. However, I want to show you how apt works, which is the package manager for Ubuntu. And to do that, I'm going to install the OpenSSH server on that video. This will be part of a using the package manager video as well as remote access video. So I'm going to uncheck that for now and just hit done. I won't be installing any extra packages here, so I'm going to hit tab to go down to done and then hit enter. And there we have it. We're now installing the operating system. Easy, right? You'll get used to it. It's fine. So we'll just give this a few minutes, and once it's finished, we'll come back and just finish up. So there we have it, the system's installed. Now it's just going to go ahead and download and install the security updates for the system. I could cancel the update and reboot here, but I won't be doing that because I'll only have to do it afterwards anyway. So I'm just going to leave that to finish, and then we'll reboot the system, boot it up, log in, and we're done. And we're done. Let's go ahead and just reboot now, log in, and we'll call it a day. You may find at this point, as you can see, it's saying, please remove the installation media, then press enter. It's also failed to unmount the CD-ROM, or the ISO in this case. So if you're using a USB stick or something like that, just unplug it and hit enter. If you're using a virtual machine like this, go to devices, optical drives, and then if the option's available, remove disk from virtual drive. Now, as you can see, I don't have that option. It's grayed out. So that means it did work. It's just a bit of a misprint of an error, for want of a better description. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. And it's done. That's it. It's rebooted now. Now here we are at the login screen. You might have just noticed it said demo 1 login, and then all this stuff's been printed out. This will only happen the first time. It's just a post-installation setup essentially, or a script running in the background. So don't worry about it. If you kind of look like something's happening, just hit enter a couple of times and you'll see the login prompt again. And there it is. So I'm going to put Drew for the username, put my password in, and we're in. You could stop the video here if you want, but just before you do, we're just going to check the status of the RAID. And to do that, we just need to check the contents of the proc md stats file. So we'll check that right now. So we'll do cat proc md stats, and we'll see there's the 3 RAID devices. If these 2 options here, I can't really point to them because my mouse isn't showing up, but this line here, and this line here, those bits at the end in square brackets with UU, if there was an error, it would have something else in there. If it's got 2 U's, then it's fine. If they were resyncing, you'd get a message about that. But the way it looks is everything's good, it's all synced up and ready to go, and we can move on. So yeah, there we go. That's it, we're done. Operating system installed, RAID set up and working. Now we can just go and do whatever we want with our Ubuntu server. We're not going to be doing anything in this video, but we'll carry on in another one. So there we go, done. However, before you do run away, let me just grab your attention for a few more seconds, and that is just to quickly show you this article that I wrote on Medium a couple of weeks back. Now, yes, this is about Kubernetes, and it doesn't go into things like swap. However, it does have some guides on using VirtualBox to create VM and installing Ubuntu server. So here, you've got the exact process I've just been through in the setting up of a VM. Now, it's got screenshots and a bit of description on everything, so you can just use this as a reference if you want. And I've also got this one on installing Ubuntu server. This one, again, goes through everything we just did for setting up Ubuntu server with RAID on a VM. However, this can be used, again, for bare metal and things like that. And the only other thing I will point out is that it doesn't create the swap partition because the Kubernetes worker nodes don't use swap. I'm not going to get into why that is right now, but just to let you know, these articles exist and you can use these as a reference should you want to. And there we have it. You've got your system installed, you're ready to go with Ubuntu, and you can start playing around in that system. So let's do that in the next video. We'll start looking at how to manage devices via the operating system. So I'll see you over there.